It's awesome. So I see a lot of new faces out here. I see a lot of people I recognize. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sean Larson. I'm one of the co-founders of Mini Analytics. I'm on the board of directors, and I also have the privilege of running one of the sharpest analytics teams here in Medtronic. And if you think about this Mini Analytics event here, we're coming up on our 7th year now. So our 7th birthday just happened. And the whole organization works well when we have a community that we're building. And I see a full room here. We've got a lot of folks here. This is the largest event Medtronic has hosted. And seeing that we have a full room means that we're fulfilling our mission, connecting best practices and analytics to our community. But we couldn't do it without the organizations that help us host these events. And this staff here has really done a great job of making this thing work seamlessly. So I'd like to thank them. And it is my great pleasure to introduce to you an individual that will be kicking this event off for us. Ellen Frankel is our Vice President of Strategic Marketing for our Restorative Therapies Group. And Ellen is managing the largest shared services global marketing organization within Medtronic. So please welcome Ellen.
I see a few familiar faces. Hello again. I think my mic wasn't going there right at the start. I said to Sean when he asked me to kick this off, I said, this is really intimidating. I have a bit of a liberal arts background. I have an MBA. I've been working on the business side of things. But all the horsepower in here and all the brain power is very intimidating to stand in front of you. So thank you for the opportunity. I'm just going to make some brief comments. And I'm going to center them around medical technology because you're in the home of Medtronic. And I thought that was apropos. And I've been at Medtronic for 20 years. I've been on the commercial side of the business in sales and marketing in a number of our businesses. And I'll walk you back in time to my first year here. And I came out of a marketing analytics role at 3M in product management and then stepped over to Medtronic. And within that first year, I had the opportunity to launch a new pacemaker. Hallelujah, this is a great opportunity. I was a pipsqueak product marketing manager. And what was unique about this pacemaker is that they said to me, okay, Ellen, we want to launch this, but we don't want anybody to know about it. Okay, so not the thing you want to hear when you're a product marketing manager, and this is your big moment. But what was unusual about this device is the devices that were on the market you could consider the Lexus of pacemakers. This was typical of Medtronic, best in class at technology, everything top of the line. And we said, not everybody wants to buy top of the line. So who's going to buy that Camry? Let's develop the Camry of pacemakers so we have options for our customers. So this was my opportunity. I was going to launch Camry. Well, I started asking questions. How do we know what features the Camry buyer wants? Well, we talked to a few customers, and they told us to de-feature the product. A few customers. Not a lot of data there. Just some intuition about what would work well. What should we price it at? Well, we're not so sure. Where's the pricing analytics? Not to be found. And oh, by the way, when we launch it, again, we don't want anybody to know about it. This is going to be a stealth launch because we're worried about cannibalizing that Lexus part of our market. So think about all the trials and tribulations back in the days. This is 20 years ago. This is not 50 years ago. But 20 years ago, we were just in such an infancy in med tech when it came to understanding our customers, understanding what they want, segmenting our market, and delivering what they want, and delivering what they need at the right time, at the right place for the right patient. And we've come such a long way since. I will say the marketing function has really grown up at Medtronic, and I think it's a much more scientific discipline. And a lot of what you do in your analytics work, in your day-to-day, and all the businesses that you represent is just helping us be all better at what we do, whether we're a consumer of information, a producer of the information, or ultimately, we look at the measure in our marketplace success. And we cannot be as successful in the marketplace unless we know more about the world that we're selling to, the world that we're trying to deliver products to, and the patients we're trying to treat. So it's such a pleasure to have you here and be along the journey with you. The collaborative spirit of this group is really important. And I love the fact that we have people probably from our competitors in this room, but in this room, everybody's a collaborator, and that's really, really essential. One other point, just to show the evolution of data at Medtronic, A couple weeks ago, as you know, CES took place in Las Vegas. Anybody go? Oh, there's someone. He's probably got some stories from that. Looks like a great meeting. So CES, they have about 176,000 attendees. It's a huge consumer electronics show. So why does this matter to Medtronic? Well, our CEO, Omar Ishrak, shared the stage with the IBM CEO. And you might wonder why. Well, we have hatched a partnership with IBM Watson. And we're all still trying to figure out what this means for us, but obviously we have a lot of data that we acquire from our technology that gets implanted in patients. IBM Watson has intellectual horsepower in the computing world that we can figure out a way to partner with and, again, try to change medicine in an advantageous way for our patients. So I'm just going to read to you a little bit of snippet from that event. So it says here, in fact, in a yet-to-be-released cognitive computing app that offers tantalizing possibility, in a research study of 600 patient study that was de-identified, that's important, findings suggest that cognitive computing can predict a low glucose event 3 hours before its onset. If that is true, then diabetes patients can take actions to prevent a dangerous episode from taking place. This is no mean feat, given that diabetic hypoglycemia is an effect of insulin therapy that often lands patients in the ER. So we're talking about real horsepower when it comes to data and analytics and computing. Again, all interrelated in the work that many of you are involved with. So this is a very exciting time to think about that journey toward predictive analytics. And Sean is leading our efforts within the group I lead and trying to figure out how do we become smarter with the data that we're working with. So with that note, I hope you have a great day of collaboration and inspiration and working with one another. I welcome you again to Medtronic, and thank you.
Lizzie Wilson of this fine event. We're both board members of Mini Analytics. We want to welcome you all. We've got a big turnout, another sellout event, and we've got a big day ahead of us. We're looking at the transformation of marketing that's underway, affected so much by technology. You're going to be hearing a lot about that today from a lot of great folks. I wrote a post back in September about the state of marketing analytics and citing a report that said, how much confusion and hype there is around the topic. But in an environment like that, what's important is learning. And that's why we're all here. That and networking. So again, very happy to see you all. Lizzie?
We're super stoked about today. Our previous conference and our first marketing analytics conference was in September of 2014. Since then, today's event has grown to 22 sessions with, I think I counted 30 speakers. And we've doubled our size with about 300 people on the wait list for today's event. So thank you for coming.
Yes, very much. Now, we should probably cover some housekeeping topics here. The important things like where are the restrooms. You've probably noticed the signs in the hallway. We have 3 rooms. This is A. B is behind the wall here. And this session is being simulcast there and to the breakout room down the hall here. Let's see, what else? Lizzie,
we got 15-minute break times in between all of the sessions for the day. As we've noted previously and communicated, the internet here and the Wi-Fi isn't the best, so rely on your cell phones for the day. If you're looking for charging stations, there are 2, one in each of the auditorium rooms.
Yep. And as I said, we're simulcasting now, so we do want to say we have a book giveaway, our keynoter's forthcoming book. We are happy to have AltaScale giving away free copies, actually coupons to get copies of that book. You can go to the AltaScale table or the Mini Analytics table to learn more about that and how you can get a free book. And Lizzie, do you want to mention
the important part of food?
Yep. Food and beverage.
You can find morning rolls in the cafeteria, coffees in the hallway. Lunch will also be in the cafeteria, and I think we're even going to do an afternoon snack, which is exciting.
There you go.
We went all out this time. Another note, so lunch, we're going to purposefully stagger the end of the 11:30 session so that we don't have everybody going to lunch at the same time, because I don't want to wait in a line with 500 other people. There are better ways to network.
Okay, and finally, you've probably seen the emergency procedure slide there. Take note of that. And a final point, at the end of the day, we're going to open this wall up at about 4:15, 4:20, and have a raffle drawing at 4:25. 5 of our sponsors are giving away some pretty cool prizes: Capella, Domo, Nerdery, Information Builders, and Altascale. So be present to win if your name is drawn. So now I think we can move on to the keynote, and I'm going to introduce our speaker. Scott Brinker is really the leading voice in marketing technology today. He's been the editor of a blog called Chief Martech for several years now. He's program chair of a series of conferences called Martech, and one coming up in March, as a matter of fact, holds events in the US and Europe, all about the intersection of marketing and technology. He writes about a number of different aspects of this transformation of marketing into a technology-powered discipline, including how marketing is changing as a result of technology and new management approaches such as Agile Marketing. He also tracks the marketing technology landscape, which you've probably are all seen, and the evolving structure of the industry. He's also the CTO and co-founder of Ion Interactive, a software company that provides marketers with a platform for creating and testing post-click experiences. He's been an entrepreneur at the intersection of marketing and technology for many years. Before his current software venture, he and his co-founders ran a successful web development agency, and previously he ran a web technology consultancy that built early web apps for CBS Sportsline, Tribune Company, the Miami Dolphins, and Fujitsu. He earned his BS in computer science from Columbia, went on to get an MBA from MIT, and a master's degree in computer science from Harvard. He's here today to give us a sneak peek at his new book, Hacking Marketing: Agile Practices to Make Marketing Smarter, Faster, and More Innovative, now available for pre-order on Amazon, and will be out in March. Please join me in welcoming Scott Brinker.
Thank you, Graham. Good morning, everyone. Forgive me here as we do the quick slide swap. And presenter view. It's like magic. I love technology. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here. Graham gave such a great introduction, so I will sort of breeze by the slide that says what I do. I wear 2 hats as a practitioner in marketing technology. What started out as a labor of love, a blog of looking at how technology was changing marketing, not so much from the techie portion of that, the actual technical functionality. But what was really interesting to me was how this was changing the way we thought of things like management within marketing. Who were the people who were part of the marketing team? How was this changing marketing strategy? Some of you may have seen this terrible eyesore. For those of you who have, I apologize. This is one of the things I do is in my leisure time really, quite frankly, is just evidence of how much marketing has become technology-powered. I've tried to keep track of, as best I can, the literally thousands of companies that are offering marketing technology today. And this is out of date. This is from last January. We're going to have a new one out shortly. And I won't give it away, but it hasn't shrunk. So maybe get started here this morning. Who wants to play a little quick game show? I love this game. We're going to call Name That Profession. I'm going to show you 2 professions, and we can guess which is marketing and which is software development. All right, ready? So the one on the left is increasingly analytical. The one on the right, increasingly pushing the boundaries of creativity. The one on the left, all sorts of programming tasks these days. The one on the right, a lot of focus on design. The one on the left, yeah, automation is the name of the game. The one on the right, increasingly experience is the name of the game. So which is marketing, which is software development? Well, it's obvious, of course, right? I mean, that's marketing, and this is software development. And of course, I'm cheating here because both of these professions do all of these things. But what's been fascinating is that we've been seeing marketing acquire more and more of these responsibilities and talents and practices that look a lot like software. In many ways, the inverse is true as well, too. And the reason why is pretty simple. It's the world has become digital, and everything digital is powered by software. Mark Andreessen famously said the software is eating the world. So the fact that marketing is becoming software-powered actually really isn't that different from what we're seeing in HR, in finance, in all sorts of professions. But marketing is the one I know. Graham mentioned we run a conference called MarTech. One of the speakers I had last year was this guy, Isaac Wyatt, who's the marketing operations manager at New Relic. And he gave a great presentation that I wanted to steal one of his slides, where showed side by side. On the left, what you're seeing is a set of configuration screens for building a marketing automation campaign in, I believe, Marketo. And on the right, you're seeing some pseudocode, like programmers speak for, specifying what some code could do. And the thing that's fascinating is these two things are logically equivalent. And what the marketer is building in there in Marketo and what this pseudocode describes are the same thing. In fact, actually, if you have a programming background, the one on the right might actually be a little bit easier to read. And when this really struck me as something somewhere between obvious and revolutionary, that marketers really are programming. They just don't always know it. So this was one of the seeds for this idea of the book. And thank you all to Scale for sponsoring a giveaway of some books. You guys will literally be the first people to get copies of this. The idea behind it was, okay, well, as marketing and software look more and more alike, are there things from the software world that marketers might want to adapt to how they're managing marketing? Now, one example is something called Agile Marketing. How many of you have heard of Agile Marketing? Show of hands, a number, about maybe a third of you. That's pretty cool. I'll just, to get everyone level set, just briefly describe what Agile is. From the software world, once upon a time, most software was produced in a methodology called waterfall. And the idea was you would start by gathering requirements as one stage at the top, and then you would design, and then after the design was done, then you would build, and after it was built, it was deployed, and so on. And you did these one after another, and that was sort of, the waterfall step by step. And these things could take a while, not unusual to take months, in some cases, large IT, even years. So that's what this might look like over a 6-month period. Now, the challenge was, sometimes you would get to the end of that process, and when people finally saw what was produced, they'd raise their hand and they'd be like, well, I know this is what we said we wanted in the requirements, but things have changed, and now that we see this, we'd like something different. And some programmers would then set their hair on fire, and that was the nature of software development. So after this went on for a while, a number of software developers were getting very frustrated because they found themselves fighting change. Realized this is the wrong way to look at it. We've got to come up with some sort of way that we can produce software that doesn't fight change, but actually embraces it. A number of them created a series of things that have become known as agile software development practices. And roughly the idea is this: instead of one big project plan, it gets broken down into these little iterative cycles of 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks, where we do a little piece of this project, try and get something that we can actually show and work, get feedback on it, make adjustments, do the next piece, and so on. And you build this in an incremental and iterative fashion. And really, if there's just one thing about Agile that you want to take away, it's this comparison. It's that instead of trying to do one long cycle of development, trying in that same time window to do many small ones. Well, an interesting thing happened on the way to the web. Marketing started experiencing these same dynamics. I mean, in a lot of ways, marketing had been run as a waterfall discipline for decades, right? We'd had the yearly marketing plan. We'd break things down for our quarterly allocations of things. That was fine up until the point in time that the world started changing so rapidly around us with digital that began to fray at the edges. We found ourselves wanting to, be able to react more quickly and do it in a way that wasn't a fire drill. And so you saw a number of marketers over the past really 6 years or so start to adapt those agile practices from software and start to run marketing using this sprint-oriented approach as well. The whole point of going to this agile, I'd say it's as much a philosophy as an actual methodology, but the whole point of it is to say by going to these individual sprints, there's a few things we can do. We can, at each one of these sprint boundaries, we've got a cohesive moment where we can respond to new events, new information. We can try and get things that can be deployed out into the world faster. We can adjust based on feedback, right? This is a mechanism that when we stop at one of these, we say, okay, what have we learned? Is there anything we want to change before we go to the next one? We can stop wasting time on things that we know aren't working. So often when something is written into a plan, it's very hard to kill until the next plan comes around. But since things change so quickly now, it's kind of nice to have the option to say halfway through, wait, the empirical evidence suggests this isn't working for us. Let's try something else. In fact, the other side of that is being able to introduce these more experimental ideas. It's very hard. Experimentation is risky. There's no way around that. And it's very scary when you're thinking of a yearly marketing plan to say, this is what we're going to experiment with this year. It's a very big stage. The thing is, when you start breaking this down into the idea of 2-week and 3-week sprints, it's actually a lot less risky to say, we are going to run a small experiment for this next sprint and see what happens. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. We haven't spent a lot of time or money on it. If it does, then we might iterate and extend it in a subsequent sprint. And this way of thinking about things, how many of you have read a book called The Lean Startup? A few folks. I'd highly recommend this, even if you're not in the startup world. It's written by a guy called Eric Ries, and is actually another example of this idea of taking lean, which was originally sort of an engineering discipline. The software community embraced it, and adapting it to the way we think about building businesses. And what Eric suggested, if I grossly oversimplify his book in 30 seconds, is, the classic approach to building products was, okay, well, we build this piece, and then we add this piece, and then we add this piece, and then, okay, finally, the big whole thing is ready to go out to market. And it's only at this point that we get the feedback of, did the market actually really want this? What he was suggesting with the lean startup was it's far better when it's possible to try and build a small incarnation of the product quickly, get it out into the market, get actual feedback, and then iterate and grow steadily that way. This doesn't work for everything, but it works for a lot of things in this digital world. And this is a kind of model we're now seeing marketers adapt more and more in their work. One last thing from Lean, I'll just mention it because it sort of gets bucketed in with this stuff, is how many of you have seen these things called Kanban boards? Yeah, I mean, they've become kind of popular, and they're kind of a cool thing. There's, you have columns usually on a whiteboard, which represent stages of work, and then the tasks you have for different things that need to get done you actually update them as you get them done and who owns them, and they go through this process. And it's really pretty straightforward and intuitive, but the whole idea of it from the software side was, can we visualize the work that's in progress? And so we know what's at what stage, and can we have some really good clarity about the priorities of what we're going to do next? And as marketing has had more and more balls that it's juggling in the air at once, they've actually found this a very great tool to adapt to modern marketing management as well. So The majority of my book actually just walks through this agile marketing process, the lean process. But I'm going to sort of stop on that here because there's some other topics. I think a lot of people tend to hear this. Like if you do a search for agile marketing out on the web, you get a lot of great stuff to read, a lot of great case studies. What I want to share with you in the rest of our time here were a couple of other things that marketing can borrow from the software world. And they sort of fall into two buckets, stuff around innovation and stuff around scalability. One oversimplified way of looking at marketing is it has been the intersection of two things, messages and media. Messages are the things we want to say out to the world, and media is where and how it appears. And, we can give a nod to Marshall McLuhan, who famously said decades ago, the medium is the message, right? The media, the way it appears, actually communicates a lot about the message. And this has essentially been the art of marketing, or really the art of communications in marketing. And we've done a lot of creative stuff there. The thing is, in this digital world, I think there's actually a third dimension to this now. And I'm going to call these things mechanisms because I'm a sucker for alliteration. And let's think of mechanisms as what something actually does and how it actually behaves. Because when people interact with our website or our mobile app, even when they interact with us through social media services, right? This isn't just passive communications. There's an interaction that's happening here. And if the communications side was just messages and media, I think when we start adding this dimension of what we do and how we behave when people interact with us, that this is the art of customer experience. And increasingly, this is the way that marketing is looking at having an impact on the world. So I know this is really super abstract. So I want to just jump into one example to give you a sense of what I mean. And this is stuff I do with my work at ION, but none of this is specific to ION. You can do this any number of ways, which is to think about the difference between what I would call passive content in marketing and interactive content in marketing. Passive content would be things like blogs and ebooks and reports and webinars, stuff that we produce, our audience gets, and they passively consume it. Interactive content that we're seeing more and more are things like assessments or quizzes or calculators or configurators, something where the user, our audience, actually participates. And if passive content primarily delivered information, interactive content is increasingly about delivering services, utility. And where a lot of the innovation we saw in marketing, previously even passive content, was in that sphere around media, really creative things we could do with media. What's fascinating now is in interactive content, we're starting to experiment with the idea of mechanisms. So I'm going to give you just one quick example. How many of you have gone to like you did a Google search for something, you got an ad, you clicked on a landing page, and someone offered you a white paper in exchange for your contact info? Okay, right? Yeah, this happens a lot. Death by white paper. So that is actually a classic example of what we would call passive content. This is how marketing would generate leads in B2B businesses. And I want to show you what that looks like when you turn it into interactive content. And the example I'll give you here is something I saw Dell do. Dell certainly did plenty of examples of landing pages with fill out a form for a white paper. But what they built is an interactive content for an IT audience that was searching for issues around mobile security and mobile device management in the organization. They had people take an assessment. And again, these were IT, their target folks were IT managers, and it was a pretty involved assessment. I'm not going to go all the way through it. I just wanted to show you a few sample questions, because it actually takes you about 10 minutes to go through this. The surprising thing is, a lot of people, the target audience, does go through this, because they're asking the right questions, the choices that they're giving, are actually establishing the credibility that Dell is actually having a dialogue with this IT manager about what is their current structure of how they handle mobile devices and what are some of the challenges they see. Then at the end, all right, well, we're marketing, so we have a, call to action of, okay, we're going to give you the results of this assessment. First, we would like permission to, contact you via email. But then when they fill that out, Dell pays it off. They actually give an incredibly detailed assessment of, based on what you've told us, how you compare to these industry standards, what we've seen with peers. They provide a lot of links to a lot of content. They were very smart about this. The answer to the assessment is not, okay, we've assessed your situation and we've realized you need to buy Dell. Because obviously the respondent would not be happy with that. It's not a sales pitch. It's how do we educate people on the things that are their challenges. And this was very successful, and I think this is actually, it's a great example of what we now start to see marketers doing with interactive content. And one thing that's kind of neat about that, since, those of you here who are, love data, right? You start to think about the data that marketers are now going to have access to as we create more and more of these interactive services, where we're not just sort of, looking at the crumbs of, what people clicked on a website, but we're starting to have more of these back and forth application dialogues. Some really fascinating data that's coming out of this. But I just wanted that as an example. The thing that's interesting about this from an innovation perspective is, okay, so we've seen this model of, these three overlapping spheres. And this is increasingly the world that marketing managers are dealing with. I want to go to this other profession, the software world, and think, to oversimplify, software deals with three things. We deal with data, we deal with UI, right, the user interface, and we deal with code. How do we make all this stuff function? And the intersection of these three things in software really determines user experience. And when you put these things side by side, they are eerily similar. I mean, messages have a lot of similarity with data. Media is what we're thinking of with UI. Mechanisms and code, right? It's about, well, how do you get these things to function? In fact, the reality is, when marketers are building, whether it's interactive content or websites or mobile apps, essentially they are working with these three spheres. It's just sort of kind of more through this lens of the purpose. Ray Velez, who's the CTO of Razorfish, wrote a book called Converge a few years ago. And he actually made this suggestion that as marketers have more and more of these experience touch points that they're responsible for, it kind of makes sense to start thinking about their jobs less as marketing managers, the way we've traditionally thought of it, and increasingly more like product managers, to actually treat these touch points that we have with customers at different points on the web and on mobile devices as kind of little mini product experiences. And we could do a whole half-day seminar on all these things from the product management world that we can start to pull into marketing that are relevant. But I wanted to just sort of plant that seed. All right, so that's one thing on innovation, is recognizing the opportunities with these mechanisms and recognizing the opportunity to think of marketing touch points more and more through the lens of product managers. The other thing on the innovation side I wanted to touch on was, well, okay, I'm not going to hit you on big data. Like, what's the magic solution to every business problem we have today? Well, it's obvious, right? It's big data. We've got big data. This audience is unique. I suspect, yes, most of you, far more than the average marketer, recognize both the work involved in big data and the limitations of it. But there's a lot of great things about big data. A lot of the rest of the marketing world, it's still kind of in this mode, like the South Park, the thing with the underpants gnomes. They've got their three-step process for how they make all this money. Okay, well, first we're going to collect underpants. We're not quite sure what we're going to do in phase 2, but phase 3 is going to be profit. For marketing, we're still sort of feeling a little bit that way with big data. But how do we actually turn big data from a marketing organization perspective into something that's really going to generate results? The thing is, and I know you know this well, the data is really just the seed of this. A lot of what we discover in big data is correlation. And a lot of what marketing wants to act on is the relationship of cause and effect. And in order to get a better sense of that, we need to do testing. And it's funny, the technology allows us to test all sorts of stuff on our websites and email and campaigns and flows and all this. But still, studies show relatively small number of marketers actually do a lot of testing. So one of the things I'm advocating very strongly for is to try and shift marketing management to really think of testing as one of the key engines of innovation. I call it, again, trying to get this, there's big data, so there should be big testing. Well, what would make testing big? I propose 3 things. First, testing big ideas. There's so many, I come from a background of a sub-discipline in marketing called conversion rate optimization. So when we would take those landing pages and we would dutifully say, well, we've seen what that headline does. Let's try a different headline. Let's try a different button color. And don't get me wrong, there's some wins to be gotten from that optimization. But it's a relatively narrow field of experimentation. And to put this in a more geeky sense, because you've probably already figured out by now I am highly geeky. Let's think of this landscape. There's an infinite x-axis, goes on forever. And the x-axis is, to oversimplify, let's just say it's possible ways we could execute a marketing campaign. Infinite number of possibilities. And then the response here, the y-axis is, okay, well, how well does that perform for a particular marketing metric? And this landscape is very hilly. Different ways we might envision this campaign will have very different response. So the classic way marketing has done a lot of its testing in the conversion optimization space is wrestling with the problem of local maximums. And essentially, we come up with a landing page and a white paper and a fulfillment, and then we start doing these little steps to see, okay, will this headline, will this button color, which will have an effect. And we get results to that, but we only get so far with that. Eventually, we hit a wall, and that becomes it. And then typically, people move on to whatever the next campaign is. The opportunity here with big testing and this idea of big ideas is to recognize that across this landscape, we really do need to get much more exploratory. And we can't get there going step by step. We have to be able to take these jumps to see if there's some place we could end up that has a dramatically different outcome. And so, again, I just apologize for all the abstractness here. An example would be Dell. Right? So Dell with a landing page for a white paper about mobile device management, right? That's kind of this classic thing where they could optimize the headline and the button color and get some change there. But to say, hey, instead of this white paper, what if we tried to do this as an interactive assessment? That's a leap to a very different area of the landscape. And the way this is tied loosely to software is this is a kind of algorithm that in artificial intelligence that I think the technical term of it is simulated annealing, that when you're going to start out trying to solve a problem of getting a response to a marketing campaign, you start by trying these very large jumps across the landscape to see which seems the most promising. And then out of that, then you start to hone down to that stepwise optimization. So one thing is big ideas. The other 2 things that make it big, and they're kind of related, is this idea of what I would say a big tent. That optimization isn't just something that, oh, there's the optimization team, and you sign up with them, and they'll come and they'll do optimization for you in 3 months. That really, throughout marketing, people are given the tools, but more importantly, the mission to do testing. Whether it's in email, on the website, in the way in which we're handling things at events, and that it's a big deal. It's a big deal from the executive layer, that there's really that management level support for trying testing. That it's not so much a, innocent until proven guilty, guilty until proven innocent. Like, it's not like, why would you want to test that? It's more like, if we're doing something in marketing, why haven't we tested alternatives? And the relationship, I think, here between big data and big testing is incredibly tight, right? I mean, big data becomes both the mechanism by which we come up with the hypotheses for testing, and then the testing actually provides us more data to feed back into our models. And then ultimately, just to keep this in perspective, right, we want to take the things we learn from those experiments for building experiences. How do we now harness that data to do something really great for customers? And it's interesting that I think one way at looking at this is as you go outward from that center, you're increasing the actual actions that marketing is taking. That, analysis is really important. This has got to be the core of what we do. But to take advantage of that analysis, we have to get better organizationally at running tests, more tests faster, and then being able to scale those tests out into larger experiences. Which brings us to scalability. Scalability. So these days, marketing is being asked to do two things. We're being asked to provide scalable, reliable performance, in campaigns, whether it's lead generations, revenue and transactions. But we're also being asked to innovate. How do we do new things, discover new things, keep up with the competition, stay ahead of the competition? And it's funny about these things. When you start to put them side by side, right? Innovation, experimentation is really good, right? When you're in scalability, it's all about standardization. In innovation, we want to explore that landscape, make those wide jumps. In scalability, no, it's more like, let's exploit the heck out of the ones we know that work. In innovation, it's okay to fail fast, because everybody hates fail slow. That really sucks. So fail fast. But when we get to the point of being scalable, right, a lot of these processes are fail not. We need to be able to rely on these things. In innovation, it's great to question assumptions. When we're in scalability mode, we need to leverage assumptions. Having someone sit around the table and keep questioning the assumptions again and again, it becomes annoying, actually, right? We got to get stuff done. Let's leverage this. Innovation, we really value speed. Scalability, we really value dependability. I would argue managing either one of these columns is challenging. Being asked to manage both of them in the same organization, it really should be an Olympic sport. But this is what marketing is being asked to do. And so I guess one question we would come out of this is, can you even manage an organization that does both of these things in some sort of common framework? And I think the answer is no. But I think we can manage it with two frameworks. And the key is sort of recognizing which framework we're using for a particular activity. The IT consultancy, Gartner, a number of years ago came up with a great concept called bimodal IT. And a lot of the pressure that goes back to Agile, IT teams are being asked to produce applications for businesses in more and more of an Agile fashion, which is great. But IT also had a lot of other responsibilities of corporate infrastructure that did not lend itself to an Agile approach, right? I mean, there are things we need to do that take that waterfall approach. And so if you were trying to find one organization to compromise between the two of these, it was failing on both sides. And what Gartner very obviously said, was do both. Not the exact same project, but across different projects, run a set of things using this Agile approach and use another set of waterfall techniques for infrastructure. And it's pretty obvious, but actually incredibly effective. They call that bimodal IT. I think this is a great thing for marketing to steal. Call it bimodal marketing. And think of one set of terminology for this would be, the core and the edge. And the core would be all the stuff that we have in the scalability world. And the edge is really the place where we want to explore our innovations. Now, I know one way in which companies had traditionally thought about doing this was saying, we'll have an innovation group. And they'll be the ones who get to do all the fun, cool stuff on the edge. And then we'll have the rest of the organization focus on the core. You've got the scalability stuff. They tried this in software development for a while. And It didn't always end well because, I mean, having a set of programmers who go off and, yeah, we get to do all the fun, cool new stuff, and the others who basically have the long slog, it's the people in the long slog get, a little bit annoyed over time. So one of the things that we've seen in the software world over the past, decade or so is more of this recognition of really in a software team, you kind of want everybody having a little bit of both. That they have a set of responsibilities that are managed in a very core, scalable way, and a set of responsibility and a set of opportunities to experiment around the edge. Things like Google's, famous 20% time. Right, that's an example of saying, okay, we've got certain things you're responsible for, you have to get done, but we also want to give you some space to explore because cool things come out of that. And I haven't quite drawn this to scale. This scale is more of there's a smaller number of things that we do in the core, but they're larger. There's many, many, many smaller things we experiment with on the edge, but they're relatively small experiments until they prove their worth. And so really, if we were going to talk about investment, the ratio would be reversed. I just put in numbers up here, but pick a number. We'll say 70% of the investment goes into the core and 30% goes into the edge. I picked those numbers because Coca-Cola got famous, one of their heads of marketing a couple years ago for talking about their 70-20-10 model. 70% of their budget went to these core things they knew would perform, 20% for things that were promising that they'd had some initial experimentation with, and 10% for just wild and crazy ideas. The ratio doesn't matter in general. It matters for your specific organization what the right balance is. The things that work, there's a lot of stuff you can do on the edge that's fine to just stay on the edge. You try it, it works, you get some value out of it, but it doesn't feel like something scalable. That's fine. Just let it drop and go over time. There'll be a few things, though, we'll discover in the edge that we do want to make part of our core. And this is, again, another place where we can look to the software and the R&D world for how almost taking like a stage gate approach to innovation to bringing the real winners from the edge into the core over time. Speaking of time, I'm just about out because I want to leave some time for questions. So I'm going to skip a couple of things here that you will have the full slide deck here. So you'll have a chance to go through this. And those of you who get a copy of the book will get a detailed walkthrough on it. Because there's one last thing I want to get to. Oh, this is one thing I will mention in passing. In the software world, there had been some discussion about this difference between essential complexity and accidental complexity. And my, Einstein, the concepts he was thinking of are a great notion of essential complexity, that what you're actually trying to get done is actually a fairly complex thing. It's a fairly ambitious, theory of relativity. This is Einstein's desk at Princeton. This messy chaos would be more what we would call accidental complexity. It's complex. It doesn't actually have to be this way. Well, maybe for Einstein it does, but this is a way of thinking in software. People were often wondering, why is it that software keeps getting harder and harder and harder? Is it because younger software developers aren't as good as older software developers? As I become an older software developer, I'm saying, yeah, that's probably the reason. But no, it's because there's this thing of the essential complexity is, the sorts of problems we were trying to solve with computers in the 70s were, frankly, relatively simple problems. Once we figured out how to solve them and computers got more powerful, we got more ambitious. There's a big difference between, a relatively simple, like spreadsheet, and now some of these, just incredibly wild machine learning algorithms we're using to take all this data, and come up with really fascinating insights from it. So it's essential complexity versus accidental complexity is one of the few things we can affect. And this is, if you're a programmer, the way you write your code, if you do it in a good way, it's logical, it's structured, it has layers, it's easier to maintain. You can reduce accidental complexity, but you can never reduce essential complexity. And the reason I bring this up is because marketing is experiencing this too. Almost everyone in marketing feels this incredible crushing weight of the complexity that we're wrestling with. And I think it helps when we're trying to figure out how we're going to deal with that to distinguish between essential complexity, and there are things we can do to manage that, and then these issues around accidental complexity. If any of you manage a marketing automation system, you have plenty of experience in accidental complexity. So I'm going to skip over this in the interest of time, but in the book I don't just raise the problem, but I try and give you a few suggestions of how you might start to tackle either one of those. The last thing I wanted to mention, very briefly, was no silver bullet. So actually, the guy who came up with sort of the definitive article about that essential complexity and accidental complexity was a guy called Fred Brooks, a very famous software developer, expert, leader, manager in the 70s and 80s. And he was famous for many things, one of which was this idea of the mythical man month. Like, oh, we just add more people and the project gets done faster. No, it turns out that doesn't work. He wrote this great article called No Silver Bullet, which for some reason the Computer Magazine published with something that looks like a Stephen King, 70s movie poster. But his point was, no technology or even process that would be applied to software development would have a 10x impact on productivity, outcome, performance. Made that prediction that there was no silver bullet that was going to make software easier, better. The only thing he said that has impact on that scale is the talent involved. He said great designs come from great designers. And because this was the 80s, Amadeus had just come out. He was like, it's kind of like the difference between, Salieri and Mozart. The difference between these, the average and the extraordinary, are an order of magnitude. And if any of you have ever heard of this idea of the myth of the 10x engineer, that the best engineers are 10 times more productive than the average one, this is actually where that got started. And we kind of object to this in the software industry because in software we object to everything at some point or another. But we object to it because, right, we want more of a team dynamic generally. The rock star programmer is a bit out of favor. Is it 10x, 5x, 3x? It kind of, depends. But I'm here to tell you, actually, having worked in software all my life, it's more or less true. The best software engineers are incredibly more productive. Now, why is this? And how does this relate to marketing? Well, one part of it is talent. But I'm a believer that actually talent's a lot more widespread than I think Brooks gave it credit for. A lot of people have talent. There's tremendous talent in marketing. But in order for it to get realized, there are two other parts of the equation you need. You need opportunity. Right? When you were just working on a small number of large campaigns every year, there are relatively few opportunities to get noticed for your talent. This is where sort of, the famous creative directors of ad agencies sort of had their shot. But now, right, in marketing, oh my goodness, marketing is doing so many things every week, a lot more opportunities. And the third thing, which is the really important one, is this idea of leverage. It's leverage that made 10x software engineers, because if you do code in a way that is just right, you can have a 10x impact on performance. We've had a hard time, previously in marketing of thinking, okay, well, if I change this headline, will it have a 10x performance, on leads generated? It's a high bar. But the thing is, you start to look now at things like, social media. This is a really easy example, but it's a great one. Is remember the Super Bowl ads, right? Super Bowl ads are an example of the absence of leverage, right? I can spend a huge amount of money on creating an ad. I can spend a huge amount of money on the airtime. And that great, that works. But I'm not actually getting a lot of leverage there. I'm paying for that. But when Oreo pulled their, little "you can still dunk in the dark" tweet, the cost of that, even the whole little work group they had that was ready to do all that, right? The cost relative to the benefit they got, that was leverage. And there's a lot of examples like this. And again, whether it's 3x, 10x, 5x, it almost doesn't matter. But it's this idea that we are starting to see marketers who have the opportunity to have an outsized impact. And I think the thing that makes the difference here is not so much the technology. The technology is an enabler. It's how we start to rethink the way we manage marketing to set ourselves up to take advantage of this. So I think I've hit my thing. So there we are. Thank you.
We might have time for a quick question. Andrew or Josh, can anyone have a quick one? We're getting down to the wire here. But we will have Scott's deck available, and certainly see if you can get a ticket for a free copy of his book when it's out.
And I'll be around here for most of the day,
Yeah,
so
do it
happy to
up
answer
until about
questions
2 or
one-on-one.
2:30,
Yep.
right? And on a panel at 1 o'clock. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
A couple other housekeeping items too. What's that? Yep. We don't have much time between now and the next session. We did have one change at 10:30, which should be marked on the easel posters with a different speaker. Corey Trefaletti from Oracle couldn't make it. He had the perfect reason. He got called into a
thank
meeting
you.
with Larry Ellison today. So we do have a substitute speaker.